spent about the first 3 weeks going home crying because I had no idea what I was doing. HR's got a really bad name, and sometimes I don't actually tell people what I do.
So just asking the wrong question at an interview could cost you thousands, tens of thousands of pounds.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It's a minefield.
Yeah, it is a little bit. You're putting me off HR now.
On this week's Engaging Marketeer, I'm speaking to Joanne Moss of Moss HR. Joanne helps people with the HR in their businesses, as you would expect. So I'm going to be talking to Jo about what is a fascinating, truly fascinating and terrifying subject, and all of the things that can go horrifically wrong if you get your HR wrong when you are hiring, firing, setting contracts and running your business. If you do not have a HR consultant in your business, you will absolutely need to listen to this, because this could cost you tens of thousands of pounds just by asking the wrong question at an interview. So tell me, as a HR consultant and an outsourced HR company, what got you first interested in HR? Because it's not the kind of thing people dream of doing when they're in school.
No, it's not. And I didn't dream of doing that when I was in school either. So I fell into HR really. So even worse, I wanted to be an accountant when I was at school.
Oh, that is even worse, yeah.
Yeah. So I started off in a firm of accountants. I was a bookkeeper, and I did payroll as well. So that very old-fashioned payroll with the printed tax tables. So you're manually calculating payroll and manual bookkeeping. And I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And then one role that I went for, the manager at the time said, yeah, it's finance, it's payroll, and this thing called personnel. So this was about 1998, 99, and I thought, I don't really know what that is, but I'll give it a go. So I started the following week, and I found out that the previous person had already left. So I was pretty much on my own, and then discovered that finance was centralised in Manchester and I was in Suffolk. So there wasn't actually any finance. There was payroll, which was fine, and the rest was this personnel thing. So there was about 250 employees. We had 5 out bases, and it was warehousing and logistics. So I spent about the first 3 weeks going home crying because I had no idea what I was doing. It's completely in over my head. No one in the business really knew what the job entailed at all. But I'm not one to give up easily. So I stuck at it, and ended up loving it, kind of self-taught. And then when I left there, I went into my first full-time HR role, if you like.
What changed though from you going home crying to then you loving it? What made it different?
What changed? Well, one, I don't give up easily. So I was in this role where there was something that I didn't know what to do with. So I just started doing some research about, what this personnel thing was. I obviously did payroll, so I had a little bit of an understanding from that perspective, but it's quite different. So I just did research and spoke to people, and learned on my feet really about what the job entailed. And I think what's kind of lit the flame for me was that I could really influence how people felt at work.
Right.
So, for example, if someone has an accident and they've been off work for a period of time, it can be, the longer somebody's off, the more difficult it can be to come back to work because, they might have changed physically, their skills, they might not have the same skills if they've been injured physically, or emotionally, it can sometimes be quite difficult to come back to work. And I realized that I can really influence that and make it better for people and get them back to work sooner, which is obviously best for the employer and for the employee. So I think I just found some kind of job satisfaction in that area, that kind of just lit that fire for me, really.
I think there's a lot of lack of understanding, I think, on how it affects people when they are away from work. Not just accidents, as you say, or injuries or sickness. It can be simple as a holiday or maternity, or any leave that they have, any absence from it coming back always seems to be quite daunting. Because I know you're in BNI, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, but we had a member of our BNI a few years ago who was very anxious about doing his weekly talk, about doing the 60 seconds, and he really anxious about doing a 10 minutes. And he got better and better and got okay at doing it. He was still hyperventilating when he spoke, but he was able to do it. But then he went and got married, and he was away for 3 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and he never came back.
Wow.
Not because he didn't like BNI or it wasn't working for him, just those 3 weeks away made him more and more anxious about coming back and doing a talk again and doing potentially a featured presentation. We never saw him again. But it can really impact you, not just injuries. And I don't think people realise that.
No, I don't think they do. And there are really simple things that you can do to help alleviate some of that stress and that worry about coming back to work or to, or to a group or a BNI meeting. And most of that is really just being in touch with that person, and reassuring them, and, perhaps saying to when someone first comes to a BNI meeting, for example, I always say to them, if you're nervous about coming in, let me know and I'll meet you in the car park, because even just walking into a room sometimes is really stressful for people. And
Yeah.
you mentioned maternity leave then. So I've got 2 children, and I didn't have maternity leave in the traditional sense because I resigned from my corporate role when I had my daughter and started working for myself immediately. So I didn't kind of have that. But being away for work, sometimes for months or even a year, you come back and it can be a completely different organization. The people have changed, the desks have changed around, the clients have changed, some of the processes have changed. So really, I always say to clients, treat that person like a new employee. Make sure you're in touch with them before they're due back. Give them an update of what things have changed. Perhaps they can use some of it's referred to a keeping in touch days to come into the business to essentially keep in touch so that it's not quite as stressful when they come back. But yeah, it can have a huge impact on people.
Yeah. And friendship dynamics have changed as well.
Yeah.
I always remember, I've just had this flash now of memory of school, because I hated school, but it's pretty much the same thing. There was a lot of picking on people in the playground in school, and I was with a particular friend of mine, and we would be together at a sort of lunchtime and playtime. And I remember a situation where he had to stay in school during break. He'd probably been naughty, and he had detention. And I went out, and because I was on my own, the people that would normally have a go at us got me to join them. And then when he came out, maybe half an hour later, we all picked on him. And I remember doing it thinking, why am I doing this? But then a few days later or a week later, again, this memory flashes in that I had to stay in and he went out. And I knew when I went out, oh, he's going to be picking on me now. The friendship dynamic had changed because of the absence, even though it was only 20 minutes, half an hour. It just completely changes. And that's the same as in the workplace. Not to the same extremes that you're picking on people, obviously, because that was kids, and kids are horrible. But it's the same thing. That absence makes you more anxious about something that may or may not happen, and it doesn't make you want to go back to it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's the fear of the unknown, that things have probably changed whilst you've been away, but you don't know what's changed. And quite often when people have been in and covered a role, they've done an interim role or a fixed term role to cover, maternity leave or absence or something, there's always that fear as well that, well, what happens if that person has done the job better than me? And that kind of insecurity kicks in as well. So getting in touch with people early and staying in touch with them and reassuring them is so important. It makes such a difference to them.
So I get the feeling when you took this role on, you've embraced it and you've loved it and you've made a business out of it because you like to help people and make them feel secure, make them feel happy, make them feel wanted and cherished in the workplace.
Yes, exactly.
But HR can do the opposite though, can't it?
HR's got a really bad name, and
Mm.
sometimes I don't actually tell people what I do because there's one particular person who is a professional businessman locally and runs an organization, and he delivers training sometimes. I won't mention him. And I went to one of his workshops a long time ago, and we did the introductions around the room. And when it came to me, I said what he did, and he literally sneered at me. And for the
Mm.
rest of the workshop, he continued to make these little comments. And it turns out that he'd been made redundant previously, a few years previous, and had a bad experience. And he really kind of took that out on me because I was HR.
Mm.
Um, and it was really, I wasn't upset by it. I was just a little bit annoyed by it and a little bit sad about it because HR have to deliver a message sometimes, but they don't make the decisions
No.
really. Um, they deliver that message, and therefore, that old saying, "Don't shoot the messenger," that HR are blamed for it. But we also have to deal with quite negative things. So, like grievances, those absences, dismissals. So, yeah, it does come with negative connotations, but actually, we can have a really positive influence as well, and we can
Mm.
make a difference to bottom line. So, yes, I think you're right. It's not always the good stuff that we get to do.
Yeah, as an employee, and I've been there. You know, if you go into a meeting with a manager and there's somebody from HR in the room, something's gone wrong, and quite
Yes.
likely you're in trouble over something that you've done or said. So
Yes. Yeah.
I've been there a long time ago. Um, you mentioned this guy. Obviously, he'd made out HR people were the enemy in his eye because he'd been made redundant. He'd probably
Mhm.
done something. Well, I don't know. I'm not putting words in your mouth. He may have done something to bring that on himself. I don't know.
You might have done.
He may well have done. He may well have done. But there's a lot of people in business who do, as you say, sneer at HR and think, oh, it's soft skills, it's people, touchy feely. I
Mhm.
don't need any of that crap in my business. I can run it myself. I don't need HR. But there's some really awful mistakes you can make if you don't have HR
Mhm.
advice within your business, isn't it? Can you give a couple of examples of what those are?
Yeah, and I think it's a case of you don't know what you don't know. So it's my strapline is people management made simple because HR is just a process. You have to follow the process. So you can make a decision about something that is totally fair, but actually if you haven't followed your process, then it can be automatically unfair. So for example, I see quite a lot of the time people advertising, usually on social media, usually builders or someone in trade, and they say, young lad wanted, school leaver wanted, and it just makes me cringe because I know they what they're saying. They want a young man who's
Yeah,
strong, who can do the job. But
yeah.
from an employment law perspective, they're really putting themselves at risk. So quite often I'll just message them and just say, look, I'm not after your business. Please just be aware of this. You might want to reword it.
I
Because
laugh.
it's
I was laughing at that then. Sorry, I was laughing at that then because there was a guy in our BNI, and he knows who he is if he's listening to this. He stood up and said, "I'm looking for strong young men. Nobody over the age of 40."
oh my gosh.
Because he was a builder. And it's like, mate, you can't say that. You can't do that. You've just said that in a room full of like 35 people. No, no. Sorry, go
Yeah.
on.
No, and that yeah, it is a good example because people don't know what they don't know. So they don't know that they shouldn't be saying that was actually they should be describing the job so people can decide for themselves whether they can do it or not. And then you would interview. So my daughter is obviously a bit of a feminist because she's my daughter. And she's a teenager. She said to me a couple of years ago, she goes, Mum, at school today, one of the teachers said, could I have some strong lads to help move tables? And I said, I'm strong and I can move tables. And I said, yes, you can. And she actually is really strong for being such a small girl. She's really strong, but it's not just adults that have got
Mm.
this mindset. It's even teachers are, putting it in these students' mind from a young age. So it really is about educating and just knowing that when you want to take somebody on, there are rules and things you have to follow.
Mm,
And speaking to an expert can really keep you out of trouble. And it can be really as simple as the wording in a job ad,
mm,
because you don't have to employ someone to be taken to an employment tribunal for discrimination, for example.
mm. No, they can do that as soon as they apply, can't they?
Yes. Yeah.
Which a lot of people don't realise. And particularly with the interview, for example, there are things that you can ask somebody at interview that maybe 30 years ago you'd have got away with, but now you're really on thin ice if you ask them, such as, are you expecting to start a family soon? Or even, do you
Absolutely.
smoke?
Yeah, the family thing is so I'd still know people who ask that. What does your husband do? And it's like, well, why is that why is that relevant? Do you own your own home kind of thing? It's like why are these things relevant? I can either do the job or I can't. Actually makes no difference really whether I'm married or what my husband does or what my wife does or whatever. So yeah, I think it's so easy to get it right, but it's really easy to get it wrong as well, which can be disastrous for businesses.
Hmm. You say disastrous. What are the implications? If somebody were to go for an interview with, let's say, an elderly dinosaur that were to ask this kind of thing, and he
Mm.
asked a woman outright, are you expecting to have a baby in the next 5 years? What theoretically could happen as a
Well, what
result of
could
that?
happen is, so if that person didn't get the job and say a man got the job, she could say, well, he didn't give me that job because I said I was going to have a child, and therefore it's direct sex discrimination. At an employment tribunal, there's no cap on the limit that someone can be awarded for sex discrimination, well, for any discrimination, but in particular, in this case, sex
Oh.
discrimination. So there could be a massive award. Um, they're going to an employment tribunal, or even if you settle before employment tribunal, there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done. So, managers' time, solicitors' fees, and obviously there could be PR implications as well. So it can kind of take over your whole life, really, because it takes up such a lot of time and money and
So,
resources.
so just asking the wrong question at an interview could cost you thousands, tens of thousands of pounds.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And there's no excuse in an employment tribunal to say, well, I didn't know, because as an employer, you should make it your business to know these things.
Hmm.
I quite often I liken it to driving a car. So you can have a lovely car, you can go out every day, and you can speed if you want. You can not have an MOT, you might not wear your seatbelt, and you might always get away with that. You might go through life and never get caught. However, there might be that time where perhaps you have an accident or there's a police car sitting at the end of the road. And I liken that to HR. You can run a business and you can do whatever you want. You can just dismiss people, you can discriminate against people, and it might always be fine. But there might be a day where you get it wrong and someone takes it further, and it could decimate a business.
Hmm.
So I always see myself as a bit of a risk assessor when I'm dealing with cases, and I say, well, this is the way I think you should deal with it. You could deal with it this way, which, if you wanted to, you can make a commercial decision and deal with it that way. These are the risks, but it's up to you whether you take that risk. So I tend to
Hmm.
give them maybe two or three options.
Hmm. I was wincing then because you mentioned speeding, and I'm on 9 points.
Ooh.
Although by the time this podcast goes out, hopefully it's still 9 points. It's no more. Yeah, I've got more points. Got more points than Manchester United right now. So I was going to say that Ipswich, but that was last season. I don't know how they're doing this season because I know you're from Ipswich. What was I going to say?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, I got sidetracked in just having to go at Manchester United. That happens that way. Oh yeah, in terms of interviews and what people don't know about HR, do you think there's a lack of understanding also on employees, on people just basically going for jobs, people in the working environment, on what their rights are within HR? I mean, I think off the top of my head, for example, that if you work in a job such as ours, you legally have to be given a contract on day one.
Mhm.
If you're not
Yes.
given
Yes.
that, the company is in breach. Do people know their rights on this sort of stuff?
I think people know their rights much better than they did a few years ago, because probably because of social media and things that are available on the internet, for example. So yes, I think people are more aware of their rights. Whether they always get it right is another matter. Um, so yes, more often than not, I think they do know their rights. Yes.
Mm.
But as I say, it's not always quite accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't really trust social media or AI. ChatGPT is going to tell you what it wants.
No. So, for example, Chat GPT, I don't know whether it was Chat GPT or something like that, but there was an employer recently who went to court and they had used, an AI tool to write some case
Ooh.
law. And the
Ooh.
case law wasn't true. It wasn't real case law at all. So they've been struck off. So I
Oh.
think especially the young, maybe this maybe is a fleeting comment, but especially the younger generation are relying on these AI tools more and more.
Mm.
And actually, it's not always accurate.
Mm.
Um, because you can normally, if an employee, for example, has written a grievance, you know whether they've written it or whether it's AI if you know that employee.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yes.
yeah, they might quote employment law and it's not quite right.
Mm. So in terms of businesses, then, so there's a lot of expense that businesses have to do when they're starting up. If you go into business, you do it because you want to make the lifestyle that you want for yourself and for your family. You don't go in because you necessarily want to employ loads of people and you want to be
No.
sitting in endless meetings and one-to-ones and hiring people and dealing with HR and payroll and national insurance contributions. Nobody really wants to do all of that.
No.
So what would you say is the absolute minimum requirement a business needs in terms of HR if they're going to be taking on staff?
Mhm. Um, the absolute minimum is, yeah, your employment contract and a good employment contract that reflects your business. Quite often people will say, "Oh yeah, I used to work for whatever corporate company and I just borrowed theirs and I used theirs." Well, those kinds of policies, procedures, contracts are written for big corporates, not for small organizations. So they're not really fit for purpose. They don't fit. And you
Hmm.
want your employment contracts and your policies to work for you, not against you. So whatever's written into those should be happening in practice. And if it's not, then they need to be changed. So a good employment contract and a good set of essential policies. So, for example, disciplinary policy, grievance policy,
Hmm.
absence policy. So it's all laid out. So both parties know where they stand. So it's all transparent. Everyone knows where they stand. I think those are the most important things.
Hmm. And I think what's also important from experience from companies I've worked in before is the how you dismiss stuff if that
Yes.
happens.
Hmm.
There's a lot of, and I'm going to use the word dinosaur again. There's a lot of dinosaurs in businesses that think you can just say to somebody, "Right, that's it, you're fired, get out," and that's job done.
Hmm.
Because many years ago, that may have been how it used to work,
Yeah.
but it's not how it works now, and that can cost you a lot of money. I used to work at an agency. I'm careful now, I don't name them. They don't exist anymore, so I probably could name them. I
So,
won't. But I used to work with an agency in Cardiff about 20 years ago now. And there was somebody, one of the people that worked there, got into some trouble because the owners of the company thought he'd given software they owned to somebody else, to an ex-employee. And he hadn't. He hadn't done it. It was another person there when he wasn't in. And it automatically signed in to, we used to use MSN Messenger back then,
mhm.
which also signs into your personal Hotmail. So they went into his personal Hotmail and saw emails from this ex-employee asking for the copy of the software, which he didn't do. He didn't give them. And they took that as, oh, he's done it. And they brought him in and then sacked him because they'd accessed his personal email, even though it was on a work
Right.
machine. And you can't do that. Even though it's signed in, it's his personal email. They're not allowed to look at it. They're not allowed to see it. And they did, and they used it, and they dismissed him. He went to this huge HR lawyer called Eversheds. If you've heard
Hmm.
of them,
Yep. Yep.
absolute monsters. Would never want to go up against them. They got him a massive, massive settlement, and he was able to write his own reference in their words,
Mhm.
all because they didn't know how to do it. They didn't have any HR advice whatsoever. They had no consultation. They just went, you've done that, you're fired. And it massively backfired on them.
Gosh.
And
Yeah.
that's the sort of stuff that businesses are doing, the kind of mistakes that
Mm.
people make if they don't take advice from people like you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really, it doesn't take much just to have a phone call with somebody and just say, look, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Is that okay? And then it's, a yes or a
Mm.
no. Um, Luckily, touch wood, I don't get too many people now phoning me saying, "Oh, I've done this. Is it okay?" Most people now will phone me beforehand because I've drummed it into them. Ring me before you do anything.
Mm.
Because yeah, a quick phone call can kind of change that course and save them a lot of time and heartache. Because yeah, as an employer, they should know. A bit like when you drive a car, it's your responsibility to know what the law is and what the road signs mean, for example. And it's the same with employing people.
Always back to the road signs. You've got to keep rubbing that one in, haven't you? Always back to the.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Because
I
it's
drive in.
very
I drive in Wales as well. The road signs lie. Some of them still say 30, but it's actually 20. I don't know legally how they can get away with that, but
do they still say 30?
some of
Oh,
them say 30. Yeah, but they're not. They're
interesting.
20. Yeah, I mean, I would argue that
Yeah.
personally. I've not
Yes.
been caught on that particular one yet, but I would definitely argue that. But hopefully, it won't come to it.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I would too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you, with your own business, you obviously
Mm.
joined BNI. How long ago
Mhm.
was that?
So I joined in 2020, so just over 5 years ago.
In the middle
Um,
of COVID.
I joined in the middle of COVID. Yes.
What
So I
brought that
joined,
decision on?
well, I hated networking.
Fair
And
enough. Yeah, yeah,
what
fair
I
play.
knew, so I was a sole trader to begin with for about mm, when was it? 10 years maybe. I was a sole trader and then decided to become a limited company. That happened in 1999.
Hmm.
So I knew that I probably had to do some networking, some of this networking lark. So in 99, I joined um, a women's networking group. Didn't really like it, to be fair. It was mainly women who were selling to individuals rather than business to business.
Hmm.
So I didn't really enjoy it. My year was up, because I signed up for a year. My year was up in March 2020. So at that point, I left because just wasn't working for my business. And a couple of people have said to me, "Oh, you should try BNI." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I've heard of them, but I don't really know much about it." So I decided to go along to a meeting in Cambridge. Well, I say in Cambridge online.
Online,
And
yeah.
at my first meeting, there was two other HR consultants there as visitors who I
Ah.
knew. I knew both of them. And I just thought, yeah, they're not having that seat. I'm having that seat. So I joined straight away and just really loved it right from the beginning. I liked the structure because obviously in my role, I like
Hmm.
structure, I like process. So really like that part of it. The group itself, they were obviously in the middle of COVID. So I think it was very different. Everyone was very much about supporting each other. Um, I immediately felt part of the group rather than an outsider, which in some networking groups, I think that can happen. There can be little cliques and
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's because we were online and we weren't actually in a physical room at the time. I don't know, but they were all very supported, very lovely, supportive and lovely people and welcomed me into the group. And then I saw an immediate kind of return on investment in terms of getting business, but in terms of my confidence in networking. So
Hmm.
I love networking and I love presenting now, and I hated it before. So I always talk for me, I always talk about the intangibles of BNI, and those are the
Yeah.
key things for me because those translate into your business as well. Obviously, when you're talking to clients, your presenting skills are really important. So for me, those are the biggest things I got out of it, as well as obviously return on investment. Um, but yeah, it was an interesting time. Um, Also going back in person it was quite daunting for me. So I joined in the July. The following April, I became president for our group, and we went back in person, I think around the November time. So I was managing that process. So my very first BNI meeting, remember I hated networking and I hated presenting. My very first in-person BNI meeting, I was president. So I was scared to say the least because we were in a massive auditorium because we were all spaced out. So it was really
Mm.
daunting. But I have to say it was the best thing I ever did because it completely knocked that fear of presenting out of me, and now I'm more than confident to stand up in front of a room.
Yeah,
Uh,
I hear a lot of people say that, how you talk about the intangible skills and how
mhm,
going to BNI specifically, but other networking sometimes as well, how it gives them confidence on public speaking, gets them out of themselves, gets them happy to talk to people and to present. It's something that nobody really goes there with the intention of doing that, but it is a skill that a lot of people pick up. But
mhm.
I'm curious as to why you were a member of this other women's networking group for a year, and you say you hated it and you hated networking as a result of that, but then you loved BNI. What was the
Mhm.
difference between the two? What made you love one but hate the other?
Um, uh, the first one felt very much just like a ladies' lunch club,
Mm,
and I wasn't. I guess maybe my objective for going there was to grow my business, and I didn't get it from that. Um, and I was quite busy. I had two very young children. I was running a business. Um, I was I was trying to grow the business. And so my time was really precious. I had a short amount of time in between dropping the kids off and picking them up at the time. And so that 2.5 hours in the middle of the day really was pretty much my whole day because I couldn't do much beforehand, couldn't do much afterwards. And I just felt like it was a bit of a waste of time because it was just really a
mm,
lunch club. And I needed to be in front of businesses, not consumers.
mm,
Um, and I think because of that, it just made me feel as though networking wasn't worth it.
yeah. And I'm guessing with that networking group that you were in that there wasn't an attendance policy.
There was an attendance policy, so
What was
you
it?
had to send a sub if you couldn't make it, but it
Ah,
was only once a month.
oh, I
So
see. Right.
yeah, it wasn't weekly, it was only once a month.
Mm,
You could send a sub, but there wasn't any accountability in terms of being accountable to other people, or having one-to-ones or anything like that. There wasn't
mm,
in BNI, there's alongside everything we do, there's the training as well, obviously. So, if you don't know how to stand up and do a 60 seconds, there's support there to help you. If you don't know how to carry out an effective one-to-one, there's support there and there's training there. So
mm,
for me, it's just been a huge kind of 5 year long learning and development journey,
mm.
really, which has been fantastic.
And how quickly did it take for you to get your first really good referral from it?
Um, I think it was probably about 4 months to get a really good referral. Um, One, because I think it's a bit like finance or independent financial advisors that takes a little bit of time for people to
Mm,
trust you because, with financial advisors, you're trusting them with your personal finances.
mm.
With
With
HR,
your future.
yes, with
Mm,
HR, quite often people are saying, oh, I know it's a bit of a mess, or I know I should have done this. And they're almost a little bit embarrassed. Whereas actually, the I the more of a mess you're in, the more I love it because the bigger impact I can have to help you
mm,
improve. So I think it takes a little while to build that trust. Obviously, it takes a little while as well for me to show people what I do and to teach them what I do. But once yeah, I've still got clients, retained clients that I had from 2020 that are still with me now that I gained through BNI. So it's not a quick fix.
mm,
It is very much for me, it's very much a long-term, um, not project, but a long-term relationships with the people in my BNI chapter and the wider network as well.
mm. And how do you find, because this is something we do a lot of educations, lots and talks on in our chapter, is give as gain,
Mhm,
and how give as gain doesn't necessarily work because a lot of people who are giving aren't necessarily gaining, and a lot of people are gaining aren't necessarily giving.
mhm.
how did you find it in terms of giving referrals to other people? How easy was it, and what sort of strategy do you use?
I found it quite easy to give referrals. So people will often say to me, I don't have that many clients, or, I work on my own, so I don't talk to other people. And most of the referrals I give aren't from people I already know. Somebody is, so for example, we've got a new person in our chapter. He's been there a couple of months, and he has a kitchen and bathroom showroom. And
Mm.
he said, I'd really like to talk to this person in his specific. So I just contacted that person and just said, look, there's a guy in my networking group. He does fantastic kitchens and bathrooms. Here's a link to his website. I've been to his showroom. He's such a nice guy. He'd really like to work with you. So he agreed to have a call with them. He's now kind of sent over to him, I think, 10 projects for kitchens and bathrooms.
10.
Yes, yeah. Um,
Wow.
and
You
so
must have some thank business for that.
yes. Yes. So I think it's just about looking for opportunities. And because I talk about BNI, and I love it, everyone knows that some people in my chapter call me Miss BNI because I love it so much.
Is that is that is
So I
that a
talk,
compliment? Is that
I, I take it as a
okay?
compliment.
Just checking. Just checking.
So I talk about it a lot. I quite often, big people up in my chapter on my personal Facebook profile, for example. So my clients and my
Mm.
friends will now come to me and say, "Oh, do you know an electrician, or do you know a painter and decorator?" So it's actually quite easy to pass referrals now because people know I've got that network.
It is when you get to that stage, isn't it? When you get people
Yes.
asking
Yeah.
you, who would you recommend for this? You're well connected. You know loads of people.
Yes. Yeah.
What electrician would you recommend? And you're like,
Yes.
this is easy.
It's really easy.
It's
It's
really
really
easy.
easy.
Why
Yeah.
doesn't everybody have multiple referrals every week like me? This is really easy. People just come to me and ask, do you know a good
Yeah.
plumber? Yes, I do. I know a really good plumber. This is
I mean, I'm
brilliant.
not saying they do that every single week, but it is, quite often that
It's often,
happens.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so yeah, it's nice because they know that I see those people every single week. You know, a cowboy builder is one, not going to join BNI, but two, they're not going to come along every week where if they've done a bad job, they've got to face you the next week. So
Hmm.
then generally 99% of the time, they're trusted individuals who are going to
Yeah.
do a really good job.
Do you know, you've mentioned that. I wasn't even going to bring that up in this because I've literally just recorded a solo podcast on this, which will have gone out before this goes live. You say 99% are trusted. There is 1% that doesn't.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I've had that experience where I was working with someone who ended up not paying.
Okay.
And I found out afterwards, because nobody talks about it. It's a British thing, I think. We don't like to
Hmm.
talk about it. I found out when he was going to come and visit our group, because
Okay.
he was from another group. I thought, I'd rather not be in the same room if
Hmm.
possible. I'd rather not be there. I had to explain why. And then someone else came forward and went, oh, yeah, he's done that before to
Hmm.
people that I was in another group with in a different region. So I wish you told me that last year,
Hmm.
because then I wouldn't have had this problem. And I wonder, what's your take? Because obviously, this covers HR as well, doesn't it? What's your take on dealing with someone who either does a bad job or doesn't pay? Because we don't like to talk about it. We
Mm.
don't like to out people because it doesn't reflect well on us if we do that.
No.
But we are protecting others from it. What's your thoughts on that?
Um, I think it's really tricky because obviously you don't all you often only know one side of the story.
Hmm.
So it might be that, yeah, and I'm not saying this is true in your case, but it might be that, yeah, I didn't pay them because they did a really rubbish job,
Hmm.
or, they didn't uphold their end of the bargain in terms of what for example, share my office with a marketing person, and, I know from sharing an office with her that one of the main things when she's trying to, I don't know, launch a website, for example, for a client, is that they need certain things from the client as well. So the client has to deliver on their side. So when someone says to you, well, yeah, they didn't pay me, how do you know that it's just a case of not paying, or rather they didn't pay for a particular reason, or just because that's happened once doesn't mean it's going to happen again. So I think it's really difficult. So from a personal perspective, if I've seen something like that happen and I see another contact going to work with that person, I might just say to them, look, just be careful with this. You might want to get some of the money up front, for example.
That's
Um,
exactly what I said to somebody.
Yes, yeah. And I've
Mm.
only ever had a couple of people who haven't paid me. And then one of them, the next time they came back to me, I just said, look, I'm going to have to ask you to pay up front because
Mm.
last time we spent quite a lot of time chasing. So we're just going to ask for the money up front.
Mm.
From an HR perspective, it's quite often what happens is they know someone has been absent in another role, then they've applied for a job and they're like, well, what about if they're the same? And I've said, what about if the last organization was really bad and they couldn't face going to work? So
Mm.
just ask them about it. Just say, we noticed, on your reference that you had a high absence. Can you tell us about it? Is there anything we can do to support you? And quite often there's been an issue at that organization.
Mm.
So I think sometimes just be upfront about it and talk about it because yes, we don't talk about it enough.
We
You're
don't.
right.
We don't. That's good advice. And you're talking about references then, actually, that's something I think is definitely worth pointing out because not a lot of companies know that. If you've got an employee that leaves you under a cloud, for example, and then you get another company come to you and go, oh, you hired this person, what were they like? If you don't have HR advice, your first instinct might go, oh, I wouldn't touch him with a barge pole. Absolute bastard. Always turned
Yes.
up late every time. Stole from us. You can't say that.
Well, you can if it's true.
But
If
you're
it's
running
if it's
risks, though, aren't you? You're running
Yes, you are.
risks
Yeah.
by
And
doing that.
one of the main things about references is make sure that if someone asks you for a reference, make sure you ask for the written consent from the person. Can you show me their consent to share this information? And I tend to say to people, just be factual rather than give an opinion,
Mm.
just be factual.
That's what we do now, and I've found a lot of companies do that. So they'll
Mm,
say, right, this was the start date, this was their end
yeah.
date, this is how many days absences they had, and that's it. No personal reference, no skills reference
No.
whatsoever. Just these are the facts because companies are too scared
Yeah.
now to
Hmm.
potentially be sued. Oh, I didn't get that job because you said this. And it's debatable
Mm,
about why that was the case. As you said, you don't know what the company that they work for was like. There could have been
no.
reasons that they were off that. And if they end up not getting a job because the company says that, then you've got potential legal action again. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's a minefield. It's a minefield.
Yeah. It is a little bit. You're putting me off HR now.
Hopefully, I'm putting other people onto using somebody in HR because they don't want to do it themselves.
Yeah, it is, as I say, it is just a process.
Mm.
Um, and it can, yeah, things can still go wrong, but as long as you're following the process and obviously
Mm.
you're acting in a fair way, then it should be smooth.
Mm. Should be soon. Should be
Should be
smooth.
smooth. Should be
Should
smooth. Yes.
should be smooth. Okay. So, what's the biggest mistake you've seen people make in terms of HR?
Um,
Or maybe the most common?
the most common mistake or the biggest mistake, I think, is probably not keeping their policies and contracts up to date. Um, because they forget what they say.
Mm.
So again, going back to people taking a contract from, a previous employer, um, and then maybe trying to dismiss someone and give them a week's notice. And it's like, well, the contract says that you'll give them 3 months notice, so you have to do that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
not knowing what their contracts
Mm.
or their policies say. So whenever my biggest piece of advice is that when you're going through a process, reread your policy, reread your procedure, because you might have read it a year ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago, but you need to refresh yourself as to what that says because you have to follow your own process. Because if it goes to employment tribunal, you will be criticised for not following it. And it can be something really simple like, I don't know, making sure you hold this meeting and allowing them to have someone present, but make sure you follow your process. So I think that's the biggest thing, not keeping them up to date and not reading them
Mm.
is a big
No,
thing.
I can see that because there'll be a lot of companies out there, a lot of business owners possibly listening to this, thinking that contracts and processes and terms and conditions, I know I need these, so I'll just download one off the internet, change a few words, and that's it. I've got it.
Yeah.
Done. Tick. I'm okay. But that's probably the worst thing you could do because you don't even know what it says.
No, exactly. And my biggest thing is, yeah, you can go online and download a contract, but one, how do you know it's up to date? Because employment law changes with what you have to have in the contract. And
Mm.
two, do you know what everything means? And three, does it actually reflect what happens in your business? So, shameless plug here. So I created a toolkit for people taking on their first employee, and
Oh,
it
tell us about the
yeah,
toolkit.
I will. And it instead of just being a download of documents, so it's not just a download of a policy and a contract, even though there are those, there's a series of videos that guide people through what they need to know. So it gives them the knowledge that they really need to know as an employer as well, and the wider considerations. And then through the contract, and the policies, there are little notes to say, you can put this in, but this is the legal minimum, or you can change this bit, you can't change that bit. So it really is about giving people knowledge. And that's so important because people come to me and say, can you just draft an employment contract for me? And they don't know anything else. And that's a bit like saying, go back to the car situation. That's a bit like saying, can you give me a map to get to Leeds, but they don't know how to drive.
Mm.
So it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. And this toolkit, how can one come by this toolkit?
It's on my website, so mosshr.com, and then toolkits. We've got a couple of toolkits on there, but that one in particular is simple steps to taking on your first employee.
Mm.
So
And
yeah,
the cost for accessing this toolkit?
the cost is 450 plus VAT, and people get access for an entire year. So I wrote it when I was taking on my first employee. So it's from my HR skills and experience, but also from my experience as a new employer as well. And what I didn't want to do is for people to download it or to have access to it, and then employment law or case law changes. So you get access for a whole year, so that any changes that I make in that time, they have access to as well.
Mm. So it's updated constantly as things change,
Yes.
so that
Yes.
you're always ahead of the law.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And there are lots of changes coming up with the new employment rights bill. So that will be obviously be reflected in the toolkit as well.
I think that's probably worth touching on. We've got a few minutes left. As an employer, it's getting scary, all the different changes that are coming in and the rules that are coming in from day one rules. And as I understand it, um, it's become extremely difficult now to get rid of someone from day one once they've started, whereas previously you could have them on a 3-month trial or 6-month trial and it was much easier, which I think is making it less likely that companies are going to employ people because of the fear.
Yeah. So at the moment, employees have to have 2 years service to claim unfair dismissal. So we talked about discrimination earlier.
Mm.
Discrimination has no service requirement. So, before you're even employed, like with a job ad, you can claim discrimination.
Mm.
But unfair dismissal is a 2 year limit. You have to be employed for 2 years. The proposal is that will be a day one right. It
Mm.
might change to 6 months. There might be a statutory probationary period for 6 months. We don't actually know yet what that looks like because it's still going through the process. So in any case, I would suggest people have at least a 6 month probationary period. So it literally just means if it does happen that it's day one, that they can claim unfair dismissal from day one of employment. So if someone is recruiting in the right way, if they're inducting in the right way and going through a fair probationary period, all of those things reduce people's risk of an unfair dismissal claim anyway. So if you're doing everything in the right way, your risk is limited anyway. So actually, it shouldn't make any difference.
Mm. It
Um,
shouldn't.
shouldn't make any difference.
Shouldn't.
But it just makes it even more
Mm.
important to make sure you're following those right processes
Of course, by using a HR consultant that knows
by
what they're
using
doing.
an HR consultant. Yes.
Obviously, obviously. You see, my fear with it was they were pushing it too much in favor of employees,
Mm,
which means that companies, employers would be less likely to employ, which would make the job market would become more difficult because people wouldn't be moving as much,
mm.
and companies would be reluctant to grow because they didn't want to risk taking somebody on, finding they were grossly wrong for the role in the first couple of days, and then finding they were sued for wrongful dismissal after hiring the wrong person, which theoretically, if this came in and there was no probationary period, could happen.
I think it already has had an impact,
Oh,
not least
Christ.
because of the increase in national insurance, for example. From next April,
Mm.
SSP, which is at the moment is payable from the fourth day of absence, will be payable from the first day of absence. So I think it's
See, I didn't
already,
even know that.
yeah, it's already had an impact. So the recruitment market has been
Shit.
tricky for a couple of years and it's still
Mm.
not recovered. And I think that people are afraid to take people on. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. They are.
Well, that's a jovial ending, I think, to the
Yeah, we need to
podcast,
have a
isn't
different
it?
ending, don't we?
What's positive coming in that you can tell us?
The positive thing is we can help. Don't be scared.
Yeah, it's not all doom and gloom.
It's
So
not all
long as you
doom and
do it
gloom.
properly and you use somebody like you, then everything's going to be
Absolutely.
okay.
It can be tickety boo, yes.
Yeah, but if you try and navigate this alone, there's mistakes out there that you're going to make, and they're going to be very costly.
Yes, they can
Like that
be.
company
Yeah.
I used to work with that accessed somebody's personal email, sacked them, and then got sued by Eversheds. Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
don't do that. Don't do that.
Don't do
No.
that. No.
So for anyone listening to this, they're thinking, "Oh my God, I need to speak to Joe Moss because,
Mm.
quite frankly, I'm a ship heading for the rocks." What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yep. So via the website, so mosshr.com, or I'm on LinkedIn, or they can just drop me an email, joanne@mosshr.com.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for being a guest on the podcast. I've loved it. I've
Thank you.
learned stuff. You've scared me a little bit, but
Don't be
that's
scared.
okay. I
Don't be
think it's
scared.
important. We are all scared once in a while. So, Joe, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. See you later.